Hello everyone! In this video, we're going to build out a fully animated light-dark theme swapper using mostly CSS and a little bit of JavaScript. And this video is going to teach you a bunch of great concepts for some advanced CSS, as well as how you can use SVG inside your CSS. So let's get started now. Welcome back to Web Dev Simplified. My name's Kyle, and my job is to simplify the web for you so you can start building your dream projects sooner. So if that sounds interesting, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this one. Now to get started, I have a completely blank Visual Studio Code project open, and on the right I have the final version of our project. And as you can see, it's a very simple project. We have a picture of a sun and then a swap themes button, and when we click that button, that sun is going to go off to the right side of our screen, and the moon is going to come in from the left side of our screen, and everything is going to smoothly transition to the dark theme. And then when we click swap themes again, it's going to do that same thing. Moon jumps off to the right, sun comes in from the left, and everything slowly transitions back to this light theme. And we can click this button as many times as we want, and it's going to swap between those different themes. So to get started with building this, let's first create an HTML file. We'll call it index.html, and we'll just hit !enter to generate all this boilerplate code. And all this boilerplate with the exclamation point is generated using Emmet, and if you want a full in-depth tutorial on Emmet, I have one linked in the cards and the description down below. Now to get started, we're going to need our different icons for the moon, this icon down here with the moon/sun, and then finally our sun icon. And I got all of these from this website called materialdesignsicons.com. So if we just search for moon here, we can see here is our theme light dark. And in order to get these into our CSS and our HTML, because as you can see here, this icon actually changes color. It's swapping colors as we rotate it around. So we actually need to be able to modify this inside of our CSS. So what we want to do is actually grab the SVG. And if we just copy all of this code for the SVG and paste it into our HTML, this is actually code that we can modify with CSS. So we can change the color of this icon, change the size of it, change the scaling. We can do everything we want, all because we have this SVG directly inside of our HTML. So let me just put a comment above this so that we know this is our swapper icon. And then let's pull in our moon icon, which is right here. So we just want to, again, get the SVG for that. Make sure we copy this, come down here a little ways, and we'll give this one a comment of moon. Make sure this is indented properly, and we'll do one more. This one is going to be for our sun. And if we come in here and we just search for sun real quick, takes a little bit of time, and we have our sun icon right here. So let's just click on this, grab it as an SVG, and we want to just copy that over. So now we have all of our different icons inside of our HTML here. I'm just going to fix this spacing so that everything is perfectly spaced out as we want it, and we can close out. We don't need this site anymore. So now that we have our different icons, let's work on the HTML that goes around these icons in order to get these different styles that we want. The first thing we need is we're going to need some form of title. So let's come into our body. We'll just use an H2 for this, and we'll call it theme swapper. And let's open this up using live server so we can see what we're working with. And as you can see, we have theme swapper and then our three different icons down here. So the next thing we need to do is create this button, which is going to have the text swap themes as well as our icon. So we'll create a button, and inside of this button, we're going to have that icon for this swapper. So let's just copy this SVG and paste it into here. Again, fix this indentation issue. And there we go, that's fixed. And also, to make this easier to work with, I'm just going to condense this down so that it's a little bit smaller. And I can also put the text swap themes. Whoops, themes. Now if we look over here, we have that button with the icon and our text swap themes. Now lastly, we need some kind of container which is going to contain our sun and our moon, because the way that we're actually going to make these rotate off the screen when we click the button is by putting both the sun and the moon in the same container and position one 10 pixels away from the top of the screen and the other one way down at the bottom of the screen. So that way it'll just perfectly rotate to the exact right spot that we want it. So we're going to put them both just inside of the same container for now. So let's just create a div to do that. Delete all these comments, and we can just have a div inside of here, and we're going to put our moon, which is this first icon here, and we're going to have our sun as well. Again, let's just fix this indentation. Oops, and there we go. And we're going to copy this sun in there as well. Just get rid of all this extra comments. We don't really need them. And we'll paste the sun in there as the very first one. Again, fix this just like that. And again, I'm just going to put that comment back in there for sun. And then we can have the second one down here say moon, just so we know which one is which when we need to go change them later. So that's all the HTML that we're going to need. So let's actually now work on adding a few classes so we can start styling these inside of our style sheets. So the first thing we need to do is to link a style sheet. We're just going to come in here, call it styles.css. And I'm just going to shrink down this side of the browser so that we can easily see the code we're working with. And also the next thing that we're going to need to do is add in a class on our button. So we're just going to come in here, we're going to add a class, and we're going to call it theme toggle button. And on this SVG here, we can actually just add a class to this and we'll call it icon so that we can actually modify the SVG and change its color as we change the button's color. Next thing we're going to do is this sun. We're going to add a class here, which is just going to say sun, and we can remove that comment. Same thing for the moon. We'll add a class which says moon, and we'll remove that comment since we now know which one is which. Lastly, we want that container, which contains both our sun and our moon, and we're just going to call it, aptly named, our sun moon container. So now we have a bunch of styling for our classes created, so that's great. So now we can move on to actually styling this with our CSS. So let's create that styles.css file. And the way that I'm going to switch between light and dark mode is by adding a class to our body. So if we have a class which says dark, then we should be in dark mode. And if there's no class, then it's going to be light mode by default. So let's just get rid of that. And inside of our styles, we need to remember that. So we're going to have a body, and we're also going to have a body.dark, which is going to be for our dark mode. And the way that we're going to swap between these two modes easily is by using Css Variables. So we're going to set the variables inside our body and then overwrite them in our dark mode for our dark theme, which has that darker background and this yellowish color. So now with those two classes created, let's first work on actually styling this so our theme swapper and button are dead center in our screen. So let's go over here, see what we have to work with. And the first thing we're going to want to do is use display of flex with justify content in the center and align items in the center. This is going to allow our content to be centered. And in order to make our content show top to bottom, we just want to change the flex direction to be column. Now everything will be stacked on top of each other. And you'll notice it's centered horizontally, but we also want to center vertically. So we need to make sure we specify our height for our body, which we'll use 100 VH, which is going to be 100% of the screen size. If we save that, you notice this is in the center, but we have this annoying scroll bar. So if we remove the margin on our body, it's going to get rid of that scroll bar and everything is going to be dead center exactly like we want it. Now the next thing to work on is going to be the colors between our different themes. So let's go over here and look at what our light theme looks like, because this is going to be our default body. So inside here, we're going to have a few different variables. We're going to have a variable for our accent color. This is going to be this orange color and this yellow color, so between the different themes. And this accent color for default is just orange-red, just the default HTML orange-red color. And we're also going to have a background color. So let's create a background color. In our case, this is just white. And we're also going to have a text color, which in our case here is just going to be black. Pretty straightforward. But we're also going to have a button text color. So let's create that as well. Button text color. This is what colors this icon as well as this button text. And that in this case is going to be white. Now the last thing that we're going to have is the amount of time our animation takes. As you can see here, this takes 1 second to transfer between one state to the next state. So we're going to create a transition delay variable, transition delay. And this is just going to be set to our delay, which is 1 second in our case. And you can change this however you want to make it either quicker or slower animation depending on your needs. So now inside of our body dark, let's overwrite some of these colors to make sure that the colors we want for this dark theme. So the first thing we want to do is this accent color. And in our case, this accent color is going to be D0D066. And that's going to be this yellowish color that you see over here. Next thing we're going to have is our background color. And this is just going to be 333. And then lastly, we're going to have that text color. And this text color here is going to be white in this scenario. And we also want to make sure that we set the button text color. So we're going to go in here and say button text color is going to be 333. And one thing that you'll notice is that our background color and our button text color are both the same between our body and our body dark. So let's actually just set our button text color here to be equal to our background color. And we can even just remove that down here. That way, once we change our background color, our button text color is going to update to reference that background color. So now let's start using these variables. We can get started by saying in here, our background color is going to be set to that variable. So var background color. We're also going to set our color here equal to our text color. So we'll say var text color. And now let's look over here and you can see, as before, we have white and black, so there's really not much difference here. But if we come over and add a class of dark to our body, so we just say dark here and save, you can see now we're getting white text and we're getting a blackish colored background. So we know that our light dark mode is working for our background as well as our color. The next thing to work on is going to be this title. We want to make it just so it doesn't take up quite as much room. It's a little closer to our button. So let's add a class to that title. We'll just say title is going to be that class. And inside of here, we can just select that title and we're going to remove the margin. So we'll say margin is going to be set to 0. And then we'll add a little bit of margin on the bottom. We'll just say 0.5 rem just to space our text out from our button just a little bit. And I think that already looks a little better. Now the next thing to work on is going to be this accent color as well as this button text color. So let's select that button, which we called theme toggle button. And we're going to set the background color just to be equal to that accent color. And if we save, you can see we're immediately getting that yellowy colored button. We can also change our color here to be equal to our button text color. And if we save, you can now see the color of our icon as well as the color of our text here has changed to be that button text color. And if we remove dark from our title or from our body here and save, you can see our button is orange with white text. So we know that our theme swapping is working. Now the next thing to do is to actually style the rest of our button. So the first thing I want to do is change our display here to be flex. And that's just so that we can justify our content in the center and align our items in the center. And that way all of the text inside of our button is dead centered and this swap themes lines up centered with the icon on the left-hand side. Also, we're going to change it so that our cursor here is the pointer cursor, so we know that we can click on this. And we're also going to change around some of our padding and border. So we'll add a little bit of a padding, 0.5 em and 1 em, just to make it a larger button. And we'll do a border radius here, which is going to be 0.3 em. Also, we're going to remove that border around it because I don't really like that border look. We're just going to have a flat looking button here, which I think looks pretty good. And lastly, we're just going to remove the outline from it so we don't get that annoying blue looking outline. But because we remove the outline, we need to make sure that we come back in and add a hover and focus state. As you can see here, we have a hover focus state, which is going to be this enlarging of the button. And even if we tab to it, it's going to enlarge. So we need to make sure we add that into our button over here so it's obvious to the user that they're hovering it or going to it that they can click on it. So to do that, we're just going to use a simple transform. So in our theme toggle button, whenever we hover over it, or for our theme toggle button, whenever we focus on it, what we want to do is take our transform property and we want to set a scale here to be a larger scale. We'll just say 1.1 for example. So it's going to be 10% bigger. And now when we hover, you can see our button becomes 10% bigger, but it's doing so immediately. We want this to happen slowly with that transition duration, which we defined up here inside of our variables. So in order to do that, we can just set a transition property on our theme toggle button, and we're just going to set it to that variable, which is transition delay. And now you can see it's going to slowly animate in and animate back out. And to make sure that our animation works properly in all different directions, let's just make sure we set a default transform with a scale here of 1. That way we know for sure everything is going to scale in and out exactly as we want. Also, this transition is going to make sure our color transitions also, so that if we change our color from light to dark, it's going to ease in and out of that color. And we can actually see that by starting to add some JavaScript to our application. So let's just create a script.js, and in our index.html, let's make sure we import that script. And we're going to just say inside of here, script.js. And if we make sure that this is a defer, it means it's going to load after the rest of our HTML, which is essentially the same as putting this at the bottom of your body. I just prefer to use defer. So now with that done, inside of our script.js, we can actually work on toggling out our light and dark theme based on when we click this button. And this is actually pretty straightforward. We just want to do document.querySelector, and we're going to get that theme toggle button. So we'll say theme toggle button. And what we want to do is add an event listener. and whenever we click on it, we want to run a function. So we're going to run inside of here a function, and all this is going to do is get the body of the document, get the class list, and we're just going to toggle that Dart class. So now every time we click this button, you can see our Dart class is toggling on and off. And as you can see, this button is slowly transitioning our text color between light and dark. But our background right now is really quick to change, and same with our text color. So in order to fix that in our styles, let's just go into our body, and what we're going to do is just add in a transition. Transition, and this transition is just going to be our transition delay, just like that. And now if we save and we swap our themes, you can see all of these colors really nicely fade in and out of each other, which looks really good. The last thing that we have left to do for this button is to just space out our text from our icon. And if you remember right, we created a class called icon, so we can just select the icon inside of our button and add some margin on the right of 0.5 em. Now as you can see, we have a little bit of space between our icon and our text on the right, which looks really good. Now the last thing to work on is going to be this sun and moon transition, so it perfectly circles around our application, as you can see here. So let's first select the container that they're inside of, this sun moon container. And inside of here, in order to easily make them rotate around like this, we're just going to position this absolutely. So let's come in here, do a position of absolute. And if we save, immediately you can see they're just set in the center of our screen. And what we want to do is make sure that this takes up the entire size of our screen. So we'll put the top of 0. So that's going to start all the way at the top. And the height is actually going to be something that's slightly different than the entire height of our screen. What we're actually going to do is set the height to 200 vmin. And vmin, essentially what it does is it selects whatever the minimum size is in view. So either our width or the height, whatever is shorter, and it's going to be 200% of that width or height. So in our case, this is 200% of our width because our width is the smallest size. And the reason we're using vmin instead of vheight here, or vh, is because we want to make sure that this transition looks good on all different screen sizes, whether they're narrow or whether they're wide. And this is because if we did vheight, this would be a very large container versus the actual width of our screen. So instead of having a nice circular path, it would actually have a really oblong kind of oval shaped path, and we want to have more of a circular shaped path. So this is why we're going with vmin here instead of vh. Another thing you'll immediately notice is we no longer can interact with our button very well. As you can see, we're not getting that cursor pointer, and only when we hover in certain spots are we able to interact with it. And that's because this sun moon container is actually covering our entire screen. So what we want to do is make sure we set pointer events to none. And this essentially prevents the mouse from ever interacting with this sun moon layer, which means that we're always able to interact with the button underneath of it with no issues. Now with that out of the way, you'll notice another issue, and that's that we have this dreaded scroll bar again. And that's because this sun moon container is larger than our entire screen height. So in order to get around this issue, what we need to do is go all the way to our body, and we just want to set here the stuff that is overflowing our container. We want to hide it. So we'll say overflow of hidden, and now anything that overflows no longer shows up, and our scroll bar is gone since we can't actually see this content such as it is hidden. Now back here to our sun moon container, in order to make these elements rotate around our screen, we're going to use the transform, and we're actually going to set the rotate here to some form of variable, which is going to be our rotation. And we're just going to set that variable up here to be, rotation, just like that. And we're just going to default this to 0 because by default, the sun is going to be at the top. Now, in order to get our icons in the correct position, let's select both our sun and we're going to select our moon. And we're also going to create a joint selector that selects both our sun and our moon because there's quite a bit of stuff we're going to share between them. For example, they're both going to be absolutely positioned, and the sun, for example, is going to have a top of 5%, and the moon is going to have a bottom of 5%. And if we save, you can see our sun is here at the top at 5%, and our moon is actually off the screen because it's 5% from the bottom of this 200 vmin container. If we shrink our screen small enough, you'll see the moon pop back up because it's now 5% away from double the width, but most of the time our screen is going to be wider, so the moon is almost always going to be off our screen. Also, you'll notice these icons are slightly offset, they're not quite center. So to fix that, again, we're just going to use Flexbox. So we're going to change this to display flex, justify the content in the center, align the items in the center, And if we save, now we have our icon nice and centered in the screen. And the same thing with our moon, it is also centered inside the screen. And in order to make it so that this moon does not appear, even if our screen size is small like this, we're actually going to set the opacity to be 0. And as you can see, that moon has now disappeared. But when we're in the dark mode, so dark.moon, we want our opacity for the moon to be set to 1. And our sun here is going to have an opacity of 1 in light mode. But when it's dark.sun, what we want to do is set that opacity to be equal to 0. Now when we change to dark mode, you can see that our moon is showing up, and when we're in light mode, you can see our sun is showing up. And in order to make these smoothly animate in their opacity, we want to make sure we set a transition. And this transition is going to be here for our transition delay. So we'll say transition delay, but we only want to transition for now our opacity. Whoops, opacity, just like that. So this will only transition our opacity and none of the other properties of our icons. Now the last thing to do for these different icons is we'll make them slightly bigger. We'll use 30 pixels in the width, and the height is also going to be 30 pixels, just so they're a little bit larger on the screen. And we're also going to set the fill. Fill for an icon is essentially the same as setting the color. For text, it's going to set this color for our icon. So we want to set our fill here to be equal to that accent color, so it matches our buttons. And as you can see, our icon actually didn't change color. So if we go over to our index.html, you'll notice one thing about these paths is they have their fill value already set. Let's just remove this. We don't want this to fill based on the current color. We want to manually set our fill ourselves. So if we remove that from our sun and our moon and save, you can now see our icons have the correct color. And when we swap themes, you see our moon icon has the right color and our sun icon has the right color. Now to make sure the transition of our colors is seamless, let's make sure we add in fill to our transition. So now our colors are going to smoothly transition between the accent color that is for light and the accent color for dark. Now we're finally on to the last step, which is handling the rotation so that our sun and moon icon properly rotate in and out of the screen. And we're just going to handle that first, the naive way, and then we're going to look into the better way to handle the problem. So the first thing you may think to do is just whenever our screen is dark, we want to set the sun moon container to have a rotation here, which is going to be, rotation, which is going to be 180 degrees. And if we save and we switch our theme, you can see that our moon icon is now at the top. And if we swap back, our sun icon is at the top. So we're properly doing our rotation. And if we actually set a transition here, which is going to be for our transform, transform, and it's going to be over that transition duration. And now we save, you can see that it's properly rotating in, but when we actually go to swap themes back, it's rotating the wrong direction. We want to constantly be adding 180 to our degrees every time, so that it constantly rotates to the right every single time. Also, you'll notice our moon icon is upside down, so to fix that, inside of our moon, what we can do is we can just change the transform, and we want to change the rotate to be 180 degrees. That way our moon is always going to be right side up at the top of the screen, and it's going to be upside down at the bottom of the screen, but that really doesn't matter since it'll be invisible. So in order to fix this issue, what we're going to do is actually set our rotation in JavaScript by adding 180 to the current rotation, which means that we want to handle this degree portion inside of our CSS, so we don't have to do string parsing inside of our JavaScript. So let's just do a calc here where we multiply our rotation times 1 degree. This is going to convert a value of, for example, 180 into 180 degrees for us. And if we save, you can see that this still works the way that it was before with the left and right. So if we remove this and jump into our JavaScript, we can actually get that sun moon container. So we'll just say sun moon container is going to be equal to document.querySelector of that class of sun moon container, moon container, just like that. And now what we want to do is first get our current rotation. And this is going to be from the sun moon container. We need to get the computed style. So we can call this function called getComputedStyle, pass it in the element we want to get the computed style of, and then we can say get property value. And here we just pass in the property we want. In our case, this is our rotation. And this is going to come back to us as a string. So we need to parse this into an integer. So we can just use the parseInt function. and now pass it in that computed style which we just calculated, and that's going to give us an integer, which is our current rotation. Then we can set our new rotation by doing that same thing with our sun moon container. We want to get the style property, and we want to call set property. And in here we pass it the property, which in our case is rotation, and then we're going to pass it our current rotation plus 180. So it's just going to add 180 degrees onto our current rotation. Make sure we spell rotation here, and if we save, click swap themes, you see it go to the right, and again go to the right. And every time we click this, it's just going to keep going to the right because we're constantly adding 180 degrees instead of adding and then removing. So it's constantly going to be moving to the right, as you can see here. And that's all there is to creating this fully animated theme toggle. If you enjoyed this video, you can check out my other project-based videos linked over here, and subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good day.